All right, here we go. It is episode 58 of Stick to Hockey Live. Jason Bertitas, there he is, Anthony DeMarco, posting stories, late night stories, and a lot going on in Flyerland, and maybe the beginnings of a new young core. It's funny, Ant, because now that Chuck is gone, the vitriol, the disdain is lifted. It's like the haze has cleared a little bit. Not Kevin Hayes. And
Maybe
you know,
soon.
I got a bunch of DMs from people today saying, I don't think this rebuild's going to take as long as we thought, because you see Cates with multi-point games, like Tippett, 5 points over the weekend. Even though he didn't have a point in the Florida game, he was really good in the game. But then you see, all these young players contributing, and it's like, okay, again, small sample size. It is going to take time. It was never as bad as a lot of people said it was, and it was never as good as some people said it was at other times.
Yeah, you said it perfectly that now that Chuck Fletcher's gone and people have, been satisfied on that front, I think that a lot are now able to look at what they're seeing objectively. And what's been going on this season, I think, has been pretty good, all things considered, when you take into account that it was a stabilization year. And it kind of goes back to what I've said going back to last summer, with maybe the exception of the Tony DeAngelo move. I don't think Chuck Fletcher made any decisions that were going to drastically hurt the long term outlook of this team. And in fact, I had kind of liked what he had done going back to last summer from a roster management perspective. Obviously, the trade deadline comes and goes, and I had said that I thought that he had kind of fell ass backwards into it. That, this wasn't like a long-term plan that, he perfectly calculated over the last like 18 to 24 months. Like this was something that kind of happened by accident. And they weren't even sure if they were going to be entering a rebuild when they started this season. It was kind of John Tortorella who really pushed that narrative to Dave Scott and Chuck Fletcher. And now obviously we know that Danny Briere is on board. But to your point, I think when you actually look at what's gone on this season, specifically over the last several games, and you see guys like Tippett and Cates, and then even a guy like Morgan Frost, although he's done it more under the radar, a bit more inconsistently, has had a decent season, on pace to, I think, surpass 40 points, so on pace to get like 41, I believe. Wade Allison as well, I think, has proven to be a quality bottom six checking winger. Cam York, obviously, I've heard from some within the organization, has been considered their best defenseman at points this season. And then obviously we know what's happened with the goaltending, even though Sam Erson's play has taken a dip since returning to Lehigh. So now that I think that Fletcher is gone and we could kind of evaluate this thing objectively and, have more faith into where hockey ops is headed long term, I do think that people are starting to realize that this isn't a situation that you have to tear down completely to the studs. There is a small nucleus forming here. I believe John Tortorella quote that there's some guys that he could envision now starting to become part of the foundation. And at least you're starting to see that this isn't something that has to be completely restarted from scratch.
And two guys that you left out there, I think, are really, maybe I'll make it three actually. The play in the last game of Travis Sanheim was a reminder to the player that he can be and needs to be more consistently, right? I mean, right around the net twice for 2 goals in that game. I thought he defended well in that game, but, I thought he was a complete player in the game against Florida. But Joel Farabee goals in 3 straight games. There was a notion that, Farabee got the money and they overpaid him. They paid him too soon. I think we all feel, if on a level head, 20 goals in 55 games in the 56 game season, 20 goals in that year, that's who Farabee is. We do understand that he had a late surgery in late June, and that has affected him a ton this year. So if you can get Farabee to finish strong and pick up where he was, not where he went to this year, on the arc of his career, and then, the one name we didn't talk about yet is Tyson Forster, because and like I'd known about his shot, like that's what he was drafted on, that release, that heavy shot that he has, and the ability to score. But I'm really kind of taken back a little bit by where he goes on the ice from a hockey IQ standpoint. The little savvy pass plays that he can tend to make. step in front of pucks to block a shot like he did with the goaltender pulled in the Florida game, and then delivering the puck, to get the empty net goal. There's a lot of little things in his game that I wasn't expecting to be this good. And I'm a firm believer that there are guys in, sports like hockey that have a minor league system that, yeah, they may be good in the minors, but when they get to the top level, they're way better because they're playing with the best players in the world and they can think the game along that level. And I don't know if he is one of those guys, but he's showing signs that he might be one of those guys that he's going to be an even better NHLer than he has been an AHLer.
And you've even seen that, in my opinion, his skating has improved a lot, and that was like his knock
Yeah,
coming out of
strength too.
Exactly. And and like you said, he goes to the like high percentage areas. He thinks the game very well. He's a big guy. Like he has all the tools to be an effective player in the NHL. And is he going to be a top line player? I think that's a stretch at this point, but I think that I've heard that they firmly believe that if he becomes a second liner power play specialist, that trigger guy, that's something that I think will be a success for him. And I think that, Forster comes up, he's impressed. I think he's been someone that you could justifiably keep on the roster until the end of the regular season and then maybe send him back down for a Lehigh playoff push. And it's kind of becoming a good problem to have given all these solid, predominantly middle six wingers that you have at your disposal now, specifically on the right side. We've just sung the praises of Owen Tippett, now Tyson Forster. We briefly touched on Wade Allison, although maybe he's more of a fourth line player moving forward. What becomes of Bobby Brink? And then obviously you have two guys on IR right now in Cam Atkinson and Travis Konecny. But I think what you're seeing out of Tyson Forster is maybe a Chuck Fletcher, Brent Flair draft pick that is finally going to help you in the way of increasing your offense. Obviously, we've seen Cam York come up, their first pick at the helm of the Flyers, but he's been on he's defense, obviously. And I think that Forster is at least showing early signs of being a guy that could really help that. Maybe not even so much your secondary scoring, but kind of like that tweener in between the top level scoring and secondary scoring. And now, of course, like we say all the time, they still don't need that high end talent. But you're starting to see that this isn't like a waste baron of offensive players here. You have some good pieces here that could form your second and third lines for a long time coming. And the good part about this is that it seems like they have an excess amount of pieces that kind of fit that mold.
And you can use in some of those areas of excess, like the right wing position, where you mentioned, you have Tippett. He's a candidate that could be moved to his off wing. Played a little bit on his off wing earlier this year, but you have Allison, you have Konecny, you have Brink coming. Maybe we see Brink, I think, before this year is over as well. You have all this. So do you use your most valuable right wing chip in Travis Konecny in a trade this summer? Because he's also the oldest out of all of those guys at 26 years of age. I read your article that you had on the fourthperiod.com. Do you think Konecny is a guy that there's a better than 50% chance that he can get moved this offseason, or do you think it's less than 50%?
Like I said in my article, I think that the Flyers are in no position, and I've heard this, to label any player untouchable. But there are some players they prefer to keep over others, and I think, wrong or right, Travis Konecny falls under that that description. And I think maybe that's predominantly because John Tortorella has a big say in how this roster is going to be constructed and who stays and who goes. And I think that he's a big fan of Travis Konecny. That being said, if you go back to, I think it was Pierre LeBrun's article in The Athletic following the trade deadline, there was a team that was prepared to give a significant offer for Travis Konecny. And I think that the Flyers would certainly strongly consider it for multiple reasons. One, because given where they're at organizationally, and two, because of their overall depth at the right wing position. And then three, his age, his contract situation. He only has 2 years left on this deal that carries an AAV of $5.5 million. And I think that of all the guys in that age group, like the Hart, Provorov, Sanheim, he's the one, based on what I've heard, and even if you look around the NHL, that could probably get you the most fair value. Like even a guy like Carter Hart, and we touched on this last week, I spoke to someone with the Flyers on Sunday, and they told me, like, yeah, we would certainly listen on Hart. Are we going to be actively shopping him? Of course not. But it's going to maybe be tough to get that fair trade value. And then you look at teams that would maybe be in the market for a goalie, and a lot of people jump to Edmonton or Calgary. Well, I would encourage you to go look at the money they've invested in both of their tandems, respectively. And it would take some cap gymnastics, and likely the Flyers taking back a bigger contract to move a guy like Hart and get fair value, which I don't think they're in the market to do. So I think that of all those players, like the kind of like I call them kind of like the Hextall guys, like the Sanheim, Provorov, Konechny, Hart, who all are good young players, but none of, let's say, the elite tier. I think that Konechny would make the most sense because of the career renaissance he's had, a good contract at a good AAV, and he still is relatively young if you're adding him to a cup contending team right away.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, I don't think the Hart thing makes much sense. He's only 24, and goalies peak later. And the other part of it too is I asked Danny about this when I had him on last week for his philosophy on goaltending in a rebuild, because it gets really hard to measure where you are in a rebuild if you don't have any goaltending.
Yeah.
You have no idea where you stand. You're like, okay, well, we could project if we got decent goaltending. And I just don't know that, given the history organizationally of what they've gone through here at the goaltending position, that you want to go, okay, Kolosov's going to be our next guy, or Erson's going to be the next guy, and they're going to be fine. Because there's a lot of variables that go into knowing if you have that goalie. I think Hart, to me, by far has been, because Konechny has missed so many games, is the MVP of the team. I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, again, in that Florida game the other night, like they win on Friday against the Sabres. They get outshot 38-21. They win 5-2. The game against Florida on Tuesday, they get outshot 44-24. They win the game 6-3. He made some really big saves. Like that save when Florida makes it 5-3. They score that power play goal with like a second left. Then the next shift for Hagee's got just a boffo chance coming down the left side. And somehow Hart explodes off his left leg and makes a right pad save that's unbelievable on Connor Verhaeghe. And I mean, like, that's a huge save at a huge spot. And to me, he's the MVP. So I don't think they move him. But the TK one, I think, is interesting because I agree with you. I think you get the most in return, and you inquire maybe the least amount of variance in the sense that he is older. He's 26, and they're not trading Tippett. They ain't trading. They ain't trading Cates. Let's just, we can tell by the way the coach talks about him. But the coach talks about TK that way too. He said the other night after the game, or the next day, he said, losing TK kicked us right in the teeth. That crushed us.
No, and I think that's the biggest reason as to why you've heard that maybe there will be a bit of resistance to move a guy like Travis Konechny, because John Tortorella has taken such a good liking to him. And look, you still do need veterans on your team. Like, I know a lot of people automatically default, like I've had like responses to my article, just like anyone who's over 26, get rid of. You don't
got to have players on your roster that are over 26.
Exactly. And especially on defense, and we could get to that in a minute too, but like up front, you need those guys. But at the same time, you're going to have a returning Sean Couturier. You're going to have Scott Laughton presumably still around. You're going to have Nick Deslauriers come back. Like, you still are going to have some veterans on this team. So it's not imperative that you keep Travis Konechny to kind of be a leader. But at the same time, I could see that maybe he has taken a big step back in the right direction in terms of his on-ice play and production, and that he has really kind of stepped into a leadership role, maybe that started last year when Claude Giroux got moved. But he is a weird player where it's like he's a guy who's had a very good season, could have a very good return, and maybe that return justifies removing him off your team. But then you also get to the other variable of like, and I've discussed this a bit in past couple days as well. If by some, let's say, outside chance you win the lottery and you bring in a Connor Bedard, well, then do you want to move out a guy like Travis Konechny, who is currently your best offensive player, knowing that you have a younger guy coming into that role next year to be that number one center? Yeah. But I think all in all, what you're seeing with Travis Konechny is one of those good problems to have, where you have a guy that could be a big part of your team and valuable part moving forward here as a veteran and a good offensive contributor, but also on the flip side, someone that could get you significant trade value.
And that's what he's accomplished this year. Last year it was a depressed rate that you would have been trading him from a position of weakness and a depressed asset. That's not the case now, even though he's missed a good amount of time. My buddy Mark Taruso says, "Is Coots back for his oddly timed bobblehead night next Tuesday? Perhaps." Excuse me.
I love how you turned off the camera, but you didn't mute yourself.
I know. I meant to hit the microphone, not the camera. Yeah. But I talked to Coots on what was it, Monday? I sat down with him, and he was on Tuesday's Flyers Daily. And I gotta tell you, Ant, like, it wasn't on camera, the interview, but the smile on his face the entire time. And I watched him that entire practice very closely. I mean, he is pushing hard. He looks where I saw him 3 weeks ago. I'm thinking, probably not going to see him this year. Now I see where he is, and I go, ooh, man, he's like right there. His game looks really close.
And you brought this up several times, is that you got to know what you have in this guy next year. It can't be like the same old, he's had a very good summer, never been in better shape, all the big extreme type of quotes we heard from maybe a guy like Donald Trump over his time, just like never been better, the best I've ever been, blah blah blah.
Gonna do great things.
Did great things. Like, you got to actually see the tangible evidence. And look, if you followed me for a long time, I've never been the biggest Sean Couturier fan in terms of him leading your team as a best player, just because I've always thought that he lacked that dynamic offensive element. And especially now, 16 months have gone by since he last played. You're going to see, how he responds to the several back surgeries. But he is one of those guys that I think that is on a contract that once the cap starts moving here is going to age fine. Even if he's 75% of what he once was and is like a 60-point center or even a 55-point center that gives you strong defensive minutes, in a couple of years, I think $7.75 million is going to be okay. And obviously a big leader on this team. Many thought could have been potentially the next captain. Obviously, that's all up in the air at this point. And he is going to maybe solidify and stabilize their weakest position down the middle. And now you're seeing maybe the framework for a long-term outlook for this team at center here. Like, I think at one way or another, they're going to draft a center this summer, like whether that they get lucky and get one of the top 2 picks. I've also heard that they really like Will Smith, which I believe I think we discussed last week that he's going to be joining Cutter Gauthier next year at Boston College,
BC,
assuming Gauthier goes back, although I assume that's going to happen at this point. And now you're saying, okay, so if you have some combination of Couturier and Noah Cates playing 2-3C next year, and then you have a guy like Elliot Desnoyers playing 4C as well, you start to have a framework here. And then maybe next year, if you get a Will Smith and Gauthier doesn't come over, you have Morgan Frost get another kick at that can as one of the top line centers. And, I think he's had a decent year by all accounts. And you give him another chance to maybe prove that he could be a long-term fixture. And then you start to have at least some competition here, as opposed to the beginning of this season where you were struggling just to find bodies to play down the middle. Yeah. So again, I don't think it's going to be fair to expect him to come back and be an 80-point Selke winging center that he was 3 seasons ago. But if he could be 3/4 of what he once was, given his cap hit, which I think is a fair one, especially once the cap starts going up, I think that maybe you could have something positive here down the middle.
Let's talk about the president of Hockey Ops, because I want to get to these comments from CMAC. He says, how do you tell the fans there are going to be major changes coming, but then turn around with no president of Hockey Ops hired yet and say Torts is going to have a big say over roster construction? Makes no sense. And he goes on to say, it ain't going to fly if Briere only change or Dave Scott's retiring. Fans ain't eating that shit. I'm sorry. The new president has to come in and make changes, period, not Torts. Well, the coach is, C-Mac, you never fucking think things through. Like, you always think on the level. It's been 2 weeks since Chuck Fletcher has been fired. They will hire a president of Hockey Ops. There will be other changes. Not everything is going to happen immediately and in a microwave. And if you don't think a coach is always going to have decisions on roster construction, especially one where the coach holds as much hand as he does here, then I don't know what sport you're watching, Holmes. Dude, you got to chill the fuck out, C-Mac. They will
Well,
get a president of hockey operations, and Torts will have a say in it. But you got to take a chill. Like, you're going to drive yourself fucking crazy. You know what I mean? Chill out, bro. It'll happen.
yeah, well, like, I mean, this is a common theme, right? That
Oh,
people
this guy
just,
drives me fucking batshit crazy, this C-Mac.
well,
He's a fucking idiot sometimes. Sorry, C-Mac.
You went nuclear, but whatever, it's all good. But
Mm.
I've had a lot of comments too about like, oh, so it's status quo to roster construction, and this is the thing that I don't think people realize about that they're entering a rebuild. Like, you're not going to. I think everyone wants to have that 2000 summer type of vibe where Homer was just flipping like over a quarter of the roster and bringing in all these big name players. But a rebuild entails kind of letting things build through itself. And like we said, like, they've already kind of done a year of a rebuild. Like, you've already moved on from the past core of Voracek and Giroux, and you moved on from Gostisbehere. And, this summer, Hayes, I would say, is like close to a slam dunk to being moved. JVR won't be back. So I know everyone wants guys like Risto and Provorov gone, and I think those are the two players that everyone really wants to see moved out. But the thing is that you're not going to trade guys just for the sake of trading them. And I think that in the case of Provorov specifically, based on his trade value, and I was surprised to hear this, so I would eat my words 100%. His trade value isn't that high given the type of player he is. So is it worth trading Provorov for pennies on the dollar, or is it more worth it to keep him around and play alongside Cam York for another year? And I think that's what they're trying to balance here, because like we said, they have some good young players here. And let's take Cam York, for example. Like, this is a guy that I think this year can make the case has been their best defenseman. I think he's taken a lot of strides, especially given the fact how often he's played on the right side of that back end. But if you take away Ivan Provorov and you trade him for, let's say, a second-round pick and a mid-level prospect, I don't know what the return would be, but let's just use that because I've heard it would be an underwhelming return. Is it more worth it to trade him for that just to say, well, we traded him and we're turning over a new leaf and we're rebuilding, and have York play with Tony DeAngelo next year? Or is it more worth it to hang on to Provorov and say, well, he's not where he was. Maybe he gets it back and increases his value, but at the very least, he's playing well with a guy like Cam York and not throw him to the wolves. Because what I've said a lot here is that, you don't want to make the same mistake with Cam York that you made with Ivan Provorov, where you throw him into the deep end 25 minutes plus a night playing with Andrew McDonald, or in, let's say, the Flyers case, Tony DeAngelo, Rasmus Ristolainen. And like we said, a lot of the younger pieces are here, and kind of like in a roundabout way, it's not that Torts has final say on roster construction, but he was brought in here to let the Flyers know what they have in a lot of these younger players. So it makes sense that you're going to lean on his opinion as to who should stay and who should go.
Absolutely, because this year's been about finding out who's who and what's what. And we're finding that out. We're not even at the end of the season yet. And Torts has said several times that the first move is subtraction. We got to find out who those subtracted pieces are. And those are going to be conversations that are going to be had with a group of people after the season's over. Boy, you can make the case that Nick Seeler has been their best defenseman based on expectations.
Relative
expectation?
to yeah.
Yeah, right?
Well, I wrote it in my article too, and we could kind of dig in on Provorov a bit here, is that, like, aside from Nick Seeler, who obviously we know John Tortorella really likes, Provorov's the only one that hasn't wound up in Torts' doghouse at any point. Like, Sanheim obviously has. Ristolainen did briefly at the beginning of the year. DeAngelo, obviously, we know, has butted heads with him. York went back down to the minors and then came back up. Obviously, Zamula has been up and down. Provorov's the only guy that has consistently gotten deployed in the same role over and over and over again. And we know that when the whole Pride Night thing happened, Torts basically used himself as a human shield to defend Ivan Provorov, which is kind of bizarre because we've always heard, he's a weird cat on a personal level, maybe as a pariah in that locker room a little bit. But I've also heard from people that Torts loves effort and he respects the effort level. And Ivan Provorov, in terms of effort and compete and being ready for game action, is about as serious of an athlete as you can get here.
Yeah, he's a gamer.
He's a gamer.
Competitor. Yeah.
And he's a guy that's going to bring it each and every night. Now, again, is he going to make mistakes? Is he going to have brain farts with the puck? Is he a number one defenseman? No, across the board. But I've also heard that the Flyers believe that he's one of the best defenders below the hash marks in the league. Very strong guy on the puck. And maybe they feel, or I could say maybe in fact that they feel that the means to trading him does not justify the impact that it would have on the ice. Because again, I don't think that this is a situation. Yes, they're rebuilding, but rebuilding could mean many different things. And I don't think that the smart thing here to do would be, given all the steps that the younger players have taken this year, I don't think the correct thing to do would be to gut your team of any player worth of value and move on. And, take Ristolainen out of that D, take Provorov off that D, take Sanheim off that D, and then roll out just this mishmash of defensemen next year. I think that you want this thing to be linear, hopefully, and take that next step. And specifically for a guy like Cam York, I think that removing Provorov and not adequately replacing him wouldn't be the correct decision for York's development.
Yeah, because the thing is, you have to put York with a known commodity.
Yeah.
Because if you put him, putting him with Tony, I don't think will help him at all. I really don't.
Yeah.
Plus, I think York could be ticketed for the right side as a left shot.
He's looked at it. And I'll use Quinn Hughes as an example here. Obviously, Quinn Hughes thought to be one of the better puck-moving Ds in the NHL. When he broke in, he was very impressive. And he was playing beside a guy by the name of Chris Tanev. Chris Tanev moves to Calgary, and Quinn Hughes suffered a lot. Then this year, he could find some traction with a guy like Luke Schenn. And this is not to say that Tanev and Luke Schenn were carrying Quinn Hughes by any stretch, but it's to say that they were complementing him perfectly. And I think that what the Flyers made a big mistake with, specifically Ron Hextall, was that a lot of their young defensemen like Provorov and Gostisbehere and Travis Sanheim were hurt majorly, more specifically Provorov and Gostisbehere, because Sanheim wasn't a full-time NHLer during the Hextall years. Provorov and Gostisbehere never had that stabilizing partner. Yeah. And I always remember in Provorov's first game, Dave Hextall said something that, I'm going to put him with the veteran Mark Streit. And in theory, that would have made sense, right? But obviously, Mark Streit was traded at that year's NHL trade deadline.
Chicago, I think so.
He was moved to Pittsburgh, actually.
Pittsburgh, and then somewhere else.
Tampa. He was moved to Tampa, and then Tampa flipped him to Pittsburgh because they got Phil Pula back for him.
That's right.
So, and you see it across the NHL that a lot of these young, even a guy like Cale Makar, Joe Sakic felt the need to go out and get an established partner in Devon Toews for him. You saw it with Charlie McAvoy, one of the best young defensemen in the NHL. He broke in with Zdeno Chara. Chara leaves for a season and a half, and Don Sweeney feels the need to go out and get Hampus Lindholm. You always want a good stabilizing veteran presence, and a capable one, of course, to play with younger defensemen. And the Flyers didn't provide that for guys like Provorov and Shane Gostisbehere. And I just think that you absolutely cannot make the same mistake with Cam York, and even to a lesser extent, guys like Igor Zamula and Emil Andre whenever they're ready to be full-time NHLers.
Yeah. I thought Zamula had a really good game the other night. He had 2 assists in the game as well. I thought he was kind of chill in the game. Didn't look overwhelmed like he looked earlier this season. Now, that was only one game. We'll see where it goes from here. He's going to get sent back down this week, probably by Sunday. But we'll see him probably tonight. Drago tweets in and says, Bill Meltzer has consistently stated that Clark, Holmgren, and Barber have little to no input in decision-making, but others recently have been adamant that is not the case. What is your opinion? And should Clark and company even be consulted at all? I will tell you this. Here's the way I can put it. They may be consulted on things. They're not making any decisions. And I will tell you that when Ron Hextall was here, they weren't consulted on a thing. Nothing. Everyone was cut out. It was Hexy and Sarge and Chris Pryor. That was it. So how'd that work out? But that being said, I will tell you that I'm at every game. I'm at the practice rink quite often. I've seen Paul Holmgren twice this year. Twice. 2 times. I've seen Clarkie once. I haven't seen Bill Barber at all this entire year. So this notion that they're around and like looking over the GM shoulder, like, nah, don't make that move, is total bullshit. Do they have influence? Of course, if they chose to put their influence in there. But the general manager, you use them as a resource in, hey, this guy, what can you tell me about David Poyle? What can you tell me about Doug Armstrong? You know what I mean? That's the kind of way you use those resources, because those guys dealt with Doug Armstrong and David Poyle and Jim Nill. You know what I mean? I don't think you use them to make your decision. So
Yeah,
to me, it's an overstated thing.
and I think that when we talk about the advisors having an influence on, let's say, the organizational philosophy, it was more so at the ownership level, because we've heard that, Dave Scott, there was rumors, and I think it's pretty much accurate, that in December he had a big powwow at the Wells Fargo Center with like Lombardi and Barber and Holmgren and all those guys. And he consulted them on big organizational decisions in terms of who should be steering the ship. In terms of, Chuck Fletcher, obviously they went to bat for him, or they had, they were used as soundboards, I heard, in the John Tortorella hire, and we know that they were big fans of his. So I think it's more at the ownership level that they've had influence. And how often is an owner making decisions, right? You're making a decision when
Owner should never be making hockey decisions.
Exactly. So I think that it's been more in that regard. Anyone who thinks that, Paul Holmgren is saying, okay, we got to pick up this guy on waivers, or Bob Clark is saying, okay, we got to call up this, like, that's asinine, of course.
Clark
And I
couldn't
think
even recite the entire roster to you.
exactly. And I think that, Chris Therien did a good job breaking it down last week on Snow the goalie. But do I think that there's validity to the notion that, whenever there's a major personnel decision to be made in terms of hockey ops in the front office, that they're consulted? I think so. And I think that perhaps you need an owner, or a president more specifically, that could be like, okay, thank you for your opinions, but I'm going to do this, and have them go on their way, as opposed to maybe Dave Scott would, because of his, I guess, not lack of knowledge, but let's say lack of experience in hockey, would lean on their decisions and their opinions way more than they should have. And I think that that's the better way to look at it, that this isn't maybe Holmgren and Clark being problems. Like, it's always good to have opinions, especially from guys who have been so important historically to this organization. But I think it's absolutely paramount that the guy making the final decisions has the cachet to be like, Paul, Bob, Bill, Dean, I appreciate
the
it,
input,
but on this one, we're going to go in this direction. See you in 6 months. I think that that's the way more important question at hand, not whether or not they should be giving their opinions or should be allowed to be around. I think that's no problem in that. But I think the bigger thing is that you have to have a guy that doesn't be like, okay, you guys say this, we're going to do that.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is, they've been, the constant since they haven't won the cup in 75. So
exactly,
that's been the thing, when you look at, they go, well, let's blame it on these guys because they've been here for so long. But I mean, what you don't have there though, I mean, we went through it last week, since they won the cup in 75. So since the 75-76 season to this moment, they have the third best winning percentage in the NHL. They haven't been a shit franchise. They're in this shitter right now, and they need to find a way out. One of the other things too, and I know that he was there yesterday, I saw the pictures, is Daniel Hilferty at the team picture day. And you get the sense that seems like a fait accompli. He'll be taking over for Dave Scott, I guess, at this point.
Yeah. Like I said, I was told a few weeks ago that his hiring should not be looked at as a coincidence. And everything has kind of pointed to that direction since. I've heard that he was around, doing his greetings, introducing himself to everyone since being hired. Obviously, Danny mentioned in his introductory press conference, he mentioned his name several times. And, the whispers have gotten pretty loud at this point that Dave Scott will be retiring at the end of the year. And I think that Hilferty is a guy that, from my knowledge, is a big time power broker in the Pennsylvania area. and obviously has a lot of business ties there. So he's going to be able to bring the hockey and business sides onto a unified front along with Danny Briere. And I think that's the biggest part here, is that you have to get all facets of the organization on the same page and in constant communication with each other. But I think that based on the little knowledge I have of Dan Hilferty, is that he's a guy that probably came in here and is going to say, like, we have to delegate hockey operations to someone who knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And maybe with Dave Scott, because I remember that during the Hextall years, you knew who Dave Scott was, but you never saw the guy. Like, I would have had trouble pick him out of the line. But then when Chuck Fletcher showed up and Paul Holmgren retired as president, all of a sudden he was the final decision on hockey ops. So maybe there was some scar tissue of Dave Scott that's saying, well, if I leave a guy completely to his own devices like Hextall did, this thing's going to be run straight into the shitter. So I'm going to maybe say, like, that's the reason as to why Dave Scott appointed himself as the ultimate decision maker on hockey ops. But a guy like Hilferty going to come in with a clean slate, obviously was one of the guys who gave the green light to hire Danny Briere. We know Briere has a lot of ties with the Comcast side of things during his time with the Maine Mariners and worked closely with them, because even when he was working in May, I've heard that his offices were at the Wells Fargo Center.
Mhm.
So he's been working closely with Comcast people for quite some time here. So Hilferty's probably able to be like, okay, I trust this guy. I'm going to have him have final say on hockey ops along with whoever the next president is going to be. And I think that's the most encouraging thing here. And a lot of people have said this, in response to my article, like, oh, so nothing's changing. Well, I think it depends how you're looking at it. Do you want change in terms of personnel? Maybe it's not going to be the complete bloodshed that we were expecting 2 weeks ago. But in terms of change in how they build a hockey team and how they run a hockey team, I think that's where you're going to see the major change here.
Yeah.
Because I think it's going
philosophically, right?
Philosophically, as Comcast is going to be like, okay, Briere and President X, here you go. You have free reign on hockey ops. We'll talk at the end of the season. That type of thing. And I always use this comparison because of their ownership structure and how similar it is to the Flyers. Toronto, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that's, MLSC, which is essentially Comcast Spectacor. So I really think that that's what we're going to see here. And just having a president of hockey ops and a GM operate completely to their own devices with no like owner kind of representative looking over their shoulder is going to be a big step in the right direction into how you should properly run a hockey team. Because either way you shake it, the way that things have been run here since the summer of 2019, in terms of Fletcher reporting directly to Dave Scott on final hockey ops decisions, that's something that it has always been flawed and absolutely need to change.
Yeah, agreed. We'll wrap it up there, Ant. Great stuff. Read Ant's stuff at thefourthperiod.com and follow him on Twitter at ADeMarco2525 as well. Great stuff, man. We'll talk next week.
Thanks, man. Take it easy.
There he is, Anthony DeMarco on Stick to Hockey Live in Thursday edition. So we do a little something we like to call Tones Takes. That's right. It is another edition of Tones Takes for the 23rd of March. There he is. Tone, what's going on?
Not much, man. How you doing?
Doing good. We're down to the nitty gritty here, and get some indications on who's going to take on who in the playoffs. And you already looking at some of those futures bets for teams that can have a path here to go a couple rounds in the playoffs, maybe do some damage.
Yeah, I mean, it's all dependent upon matchups. The way the NHL has their playoff structure, you got a lot of good teams matching up in the first two rounds. So those are things you have to kind of look for. So yeah, it's all based on matchups. See how things play out. I mean, Tampa Bay with Vasilevsky, I still they're still going to be tough to beat in the East. I mean, that's a first round series that's set. I mean, I like the moves Toronto made, but they just don't have the goaltending. I know Tampa Bay went through some stuff a couple weeks ago, but they're still Tampa Bay. So
yeah, I always get leery of the teams that end up at as the best record in the league. Like Boston's going to have that President's Trophy. But so often you see those teams, maybe it's because they just don't have a lot of adversity or urgency down the stretch. So I always worry about them. I don't worry about them in the first round, but I worry about them after the first round.
Right. Especially a guy like Omar who really hasn't,
Yeah.
you know, with the playoff experience. I mean, yeah, he had a great season. He's having a great season, but you know, like you said, when he gets into the deeper into playoffs, you know, it may be an issue. So we'll see for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's get into the card tonight. First of all, year to date in the NHL, how about plus 32.44 units? Real nice job. Let's start with the Pittsburgh-Dallas game, because right now when you look at the standings, you know, Dallas is a really good team. It's top spot in the Central Division. You know, they get 90 points already. They're playing decently in their last 10. But you look at Pittsburgh right now, and, you know, they leapfrog Florida. You know, Flyers gave Pittsburgh a little hand here by beating Florida the other night in regulation. So when you look at Pittsburgh and the situation they're in, tied in the amount of games they've played with Florida, but only a point up. So the margins are insanely thin here.
Yeah, I think both these teams have tough schedules coming up, Pittsburgh and Florida. Big win for them last night. I was on the Penguins last night in Colorado, and they played an outstanding defensive game. They were selling out, blocking shots. It's going to be tough to duplicate that, you know. So I think they're going to be a little fatigued tonight, and that can sometimes lead to defensive lapses. They're still missing guys on the back end. Dallas has been scoring a ton of goals lately. I mean, I like the over at 6 here. I'd kind of pay some juice to get it at 125. You get 6.5 at even money, but I'd rather, you know, pay it a little bit to get the 6 here. I wouldn't take it at 6.5, but I think at 6, I like the looks of this. There's been at least 6 goals in 8 of the last 10 Penguin games and 9 of the last 10 Dallas games. So I think we're going to see some goals tonight.
Yeah, and the thing is the Penguins are the only team in the NHL right now that's currently slotted in a playoff spot or within one spot of a playoff spot that's negative in goal differential. They're -1.
Mm-hmm.
They're the only team in the red out of all the, I guess you look at it, 16 plus 2, 18 teams in the NHL that are in the red in that spot.
Yeah. I mean, they've had a tough time this year. You know, goaltending hasn't been consistent. They've had injuries in goal. They've had injuries on D. So it's kind of you know, this might be it for the Penguins after this season. They're gonna have to see, you know, what they can do there to kind of refresh things.
Yeah, they're definitely long in the tooth. Let's talk about.
Aren't they
Vegas.
the oldest team? They're the oldest team in the NHL, I think. Aren't they?
I think they are. The average.
They're up there, yeah.
Yeah, roster age is right at the top. You look at another team. You know, we talk about Dallas being the number 1 team in the Central. The number 1 team in the Pacific is the Vegas Golden Knights. 8-2 in their last 10. They've won their last 2. We talk about goal differential. They're plus 35, and they haven't had Robin Lehner this year. They've had to put pieces together to get some goaltending. Quick comes in, and all these different. I think they played 5 different goaltenders on the season. But you like Vegas tonight, plus 130.
Yeah, plus 130 at Calgary. They're 22-7-5 on the road. Look, Calgary just can't be trusted this year. You know, they win
Big
game,
time.
lose game, win game, lose game, and delay 150 at home against this Vegas team, who's a better team on the road than Vegas is at home. Calgary just went into Vegas last week and beat them 7-2. So, you know, the Knights are going to be, you know, have some fire under their butts in this game. So I just like the value here at plus 130. Like, the Vegas is playing really well right now. Like I said, you just can't trust the Flames.
Yeah, and I look at it and I go, okay, who's the better team? If I'm getting the better team and the team that's playing better of late at plus money significant like that, you gotta jump all over them in this situation. And the thing about Calgary is, to me, it's been like a self-fulfilling prophecy that nobody's listening to the coach and all those changes. They looked great on paper, those changes, and I give Brad Treliving a lot of credit for not pouting after losing Gaudreau and Tkachuk, but boy, it just hasn't really worked out this year.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting team next year. See what happens, because I seriously doubt Sutter will be back. Maybe to get a new coach in there, kind of, because they do have a good roster. I mean, I thought that they were going to be one of the contenders to win the West after,
me too.
You know, after the moves they made, and especially getting Kadri in, you know, kind of replace Tkachuk. He's the same kind of, you know, type of player. So I think they could be a team that could bounce back next year. But yeah, as far as this year goes, I think they're pretty much done.
Yeah, they seem like one of those teams over the last 8 years that's been an every other year team. Really good one year and not great the next. Yep. And it's just kind of been their DNA over a pretty extended period of time under Treliving. So we'll see how it plays out. All right, so the 2 plays tonight, over in the Pittsburgh-Dallas game, You've got that one over 6. That's the total in the game, and you're getting minus 25 there. And then the Vegas plus 130 tonight over, not the over, but winning the game over the Calgary Flames. Tone, where can people get your info? Dimers.com and where else?
Dimers.com, and then Tone's Takes on Twitter. I'll have more plays tonight once we get some more goalie confirmations.
All right. It's a fun time of year. We're getting to the
It
most fun time of year. We're inching our way towards the first round of the playoffs. Tone, thanks for doing this. We'll talk next week.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Appreciate it.
There he is. Another edition of Tone's Takes here on Stick to Hockey Live. Get your action in on those two plays tonight. Yeah, Calgary's one of those every other year teams. It just seems to be the way they've done it the last couple of years. I'm not sure why that is, but that seems to be a trend that they are following, and following it once again this year. Unfortunately for their fan base, that they're following it again this year. All right, everybody, that's going to put a wrap on this episode of Stick to Hockey Live. Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you next week on another brand new edition of Stick to Hockey Live. Enjoy your hockey tonight, and we'll talk to you next time.